Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Reddit, what is your creepiest, most unnerving story? Real or not, please creep us out. Episode 4. I married my college sweetheart right after we graduated. After about a year, it wasn't going well, and it seemed like it would be best for me to move out. My brother, who is a few years older than me, lived on the other side of town, where he has a fairly large house. He is actually planning to move to another city, and staying there in rented accommodation pretty much all the time. He agreed that I can stay in-house until I get myself sorted out or until he sells the house, whichever comes first. His house was actually kind of run down. He had been planning to fix it up, but was so busy with his job that he never really got that much done. I had plenty of time on my hands at evenings and weekends, so I volunteered to do some fixing and decorating for him. Over a few months, I repainted all the rooms, fixed all the wooden floors, and even retiled both the bathrooms, put in a new toilet and shower, etc. My brother paid for all the materials. He gave me a prepaid debit card, but I did all the labor for free, of course. The last room that I was doing was a bedroom. It had a built-in wardrobe cupboard, kind of built into the wall. I decided to paint the inside of the cupboard as well as the room itself, since the cupboard is dirty yellow inside with lots of black marks on the walls. I used the last of the white paint to paint the inside, and left the doors open for it to dry. That was my Friday night, and then I went to bed. Next day was a Saturday, and the last thing to do is paint the walls of the room, which include a dark red lower half, and a cream upper half. There's a rail between them, and it didn't look as horrible as it sounds. I went to get the red paint from the corridor, where I had been using it to touch up a spot that I had missed. I then went back to the corridor to get the red paint tray with the roller and brush in it. I tripped as I entered the room. The tray and roller fell on the floor, which fortunately was covered, but the brush went into the cupboard and hit the wall. It left a mark that looked like an elongated S with a long line going straight down underneath it. Now I was pissed, because I would have to repaint the inside of the cupboard, at least a couple of coats to cover the dark red, which means I will have to go out and buy more white paint as well. I picked up the brush, and start to write SHIT using the elongated S for the initial letter. The H however came out looking more like an A, so I write Satan instead. There was still a long line of paint running vertically under the S, so I made that into the vertical stroke of AK, and wrote kill. I thought nothing of it, and then got on with painting the rest of the room. I spent several hours painting the entire room, and by the time I was finished, it was dark and late, and I was aching and really hungry. I decided to go downstairs to get some food and then go to sleep. As I was leaving the room, Satan kill caught my eye, and for some reason I decided to write in orders you to after Satan, making the message Satan orders you to kill. It didn't seem important, as I am planning to paint over it anyway. First thing Sunday morning, I went out and bought a tub of white paint. When I got back I paint over Satan orders you to kill, but you can still read it through the white paint. I then started on the second coat on the room proper. When I finished them room, I redid white roller over Satan orders you to kill in the cupboard again, but you can still read it. For the next week, every morning before I leave for work, and when I get back from working in the evening, I hollered another layer of white paint over Satan orders you to kill. I was convinced that it was still faintly visible. The next weekend my brother came over, so I showed him the cupboard, and asked him if he can see any message written inside it. He said that he couldn't. But I was still convinced that his was faintly visible. I told myself that it is my mind playing tricks with me, and that must take his word for it. Nevertheless, just to be sure, I did add a few more layers of paint over the next few days. During this time, there are periodically people who come with the realtor to look at the house. My brother was after all trying to sell it. I do particularly remember one family, mother, father and teenage boy, who spent ages looking over the house one Saturday, I think, not sure, if this is the same family that reappears later in this story. I soon moved out, and moved away to another town. Got a new job, rented my own place. My brother eventually sold the house. I met a new girl, etc. At Christmas, my brother invited me and my girl over to his large apartment in a major city. We went to visit. When we are talking, he tells me that he is so glad that he is rid of that house, since it always gave him the creeps. Asks me if it ever gave me the creeps. It didn't. Then the killer revelation: the family who bought the house, the teenage son killed his parents, and hid their bodies in a cupboard. An elderly man was sitting alone on a dark path. He wasn't certain of which direction to go, and he'd forgotten both where he was traveling to and who he was. He'd sat down for a moment to rest his weary legs, and suddenly looked up to see an elderly woman before him. She grinned toothlessly and with a cackle, spoke, "Now your third wish." "What will it be?" "Third wish?" The man was baffled. "How can it be a third wish if I haven't had a first and second wish?" "You've had 2 wishes already," the hag said, "but your second wish was for me to return everything to the way it was before you had made your first wish. That's why you remember nothing, because everything is the way it was before you made any wishes." She cackled at the poor man. "So it is that you have 1 wish left." "All right," he said, "I don't believe this, but there's no harm in wishing. I wish to know who I am." "Funny," said the old woman as she granted his wish and disappeared forever. "That was your first wish." I still, to this day, do not know what happened. I swear to you I was awake the whole time and experienced it in full consciousness. However, I want to attribute it to dreaming, but damn it to hell, I know I was awake. I was just a boy, perhaps 9 or 10 years old. My twin-size bed lay in the corner of the room just down the hall from my parents' bedroom. Next to my bed, opposite the wall, was a window facing the backyard. This window had blinds, then wood-framed windows, then a screen, and finally burglar bars. It wasn't the best of neighborhoods, nor was it the worst. One night, for no reason at all, I just woke up in the middle of the night. I saw movement at the window, a shadow. Suddenly a face appeared through the window. It was my father's face. The same father that was supposed to be sleeping down the hall, and yet it wasn't. He didn't just break his face through the glass, it was through the glass, as if he was immaterial though he looked solid as life itself. He wore a black beanie and had his facial hair styled just like my father's. He looked around the room and turned to his right, to find me there, wide-eyed and freaked out. When he saw me, it was that look that he had found exactly who he had been looking for. He walked through, let me reiterate, he walked through the window. He stepped through, at which point I noticed he had a maroon long-sleeved sweater and black pants. It was what you would imagine a 70s movie burglar to look like. He looked at me and gave me a very calm smile, a smile that said, "I'm looking for you." It wasn't malicious, wasn't friendly either, just a look of fact. The way a doctor tells you, everything's going to be fine. He takes a step towards me and I scream bloody murder, "Dad." This guy turns into, for lack of a better term, a stream of mist and like smoke streams into my white blanket. The blanket blew up into the air a bit like a wind gusting underneath and settled back down. Once it settled back down, the white blanket glowed. It glowed with a magnificent and glorious brightness that didn't touch the walls or the room, it just glowed hardly an inch, but it was so bright and well, beautiful. It felt like something happened to me. As soon as I felt something, my father had run down the hall to my room in his usual garb, white socks and whitey tighties. This had all happened in mere moments. So my father comes into the room and looks around quickly, finds that everything is okay except that his son is sitting straight up in his bed wide-eyed and freaked out. He assumed I had just had a nightmare and that's why I couldn't talk. I couldn't talk because I don't know what happened. He rubs my head a little bit and goads me back to lie down. I lay down, relaxed, and very confused. My father kisses my forehead and says good night. As soon as the sounds of his footsteps disappear back into his bedroom, my blanket blows back up again and the stream of mist shoots back out into the middle of my bedroom. There he stood, the same man mimicking my father but in a different wardrobe. The thing about this was that this time he had a different look on his face, a smirk. A smirk that said, I came what I needed to do, good luck kid. You're going to be alright, everything's going to be okay. And with that he walked back out through the window and vanished. I was 7, lying in my bed, reading, when a woman I had never seen walked up and sat on the edge of the bed. She wasn't scary at all, in fact, she somehow made me calmer. She said, "Don't look out the window. Just keep looking at me." Then she started singing a song I had never heard. She kept singing it over and over, quietly, and petting my hair. Every so often she would stop and tell me not to look at the window. A few years later, I saw a picture of the woman from that night at my grandmother's house. It was her mother, who died when she was 10. She had just gotten the photo from her stepmother, who had been going through her father's belongings. Before that, she had never had a photo of her mother. I'd dismiss it as something I saw at Great-Grandma Dixie's house instead and had a dream about, except that I never in my life went to Great-Grandma Dixie's house. Any time I saw her at a church or a family picnic. A few years after that, I heard the song again. The song was Molly Malone, which I had never heard in any other context. I still remembered the words. I asked my grandmother if she had ever heard the song, and she had. It was the song my great-grandmother used to sing to her children to calm her down before she died. When I told my mother about it, she asked when it was. Since it was a few days before Easter when I was 7, I was able to give her a vague idea. Turns out, right around that same time, her girlfriend were having nightmares that a ghost was floating outside my bedroom window, trying to pull me out. Much like you, I've always had weird things happen to me, and this is just the most vividly remembered and bizarre. It's 5 a.m. and I hear a horrible, almost hollow crashing sound outside, like an empty dumpster dropped off a building. I slip on my shoes and go outside, seeing as how it's New Year's Day and someone might have plowed drunk into a parked car or the dumpster at the end of the block. When I walk out I hear someone, a woman's voice screaming, but it sounds like people off in a parking lot somewhere goofing off. After a couple seconds of listening, I can make out that the person is screaming, "Oh my God. Hello? Hello? Oh God," over and over. I run back inside and put on warm pants and a coat, then run outside again and start making my way to the edge of the freeway next to my house. It's very dark and before I reach the freeway, I can hear the trucks passing by hitting debris along the road. I get to the edge of the freeway and I see a dark, mangled hulk of a BMW on its roof in the opposite lane. No one is there. I climb the guardrail and make my way across the lanes to the car, but stop short of tripping on a mass in the road that looked like a pile of clothes. Good thing I grabbed my flashlight before I left the house. I shine my light and see the mangled corpse of a woman, her neck stretched and twisted, her brains spilled from what used to be the top of her head. Her eyes were smashed and mangled, her jaw broken beyond recognition, giving her a sickening expression. Her bright crimson blood pooled at my feet as I noticed something glowing under what was left of her jacket. I used my toe and moved the corner away until I saw her phone still on with 911 displayed on its cracked screen. A voice on the phone came through the speaker. "Hello? Hello? Becky? Are you still with me?" My great-grandmother was a hilarious Scottish woman who was insanely superstitious and swore like a sailor. She also was a practitioner of awesome practical jokes. She had a wonderful smile and bright green eyes that would set a room alight. She was a beautiful lady in her early days from the few pictures I have on the outside, and had a warm spirit on the inside. The strange part was she would talk about seeing 11:11 all the time growing up, which we found stranger because digital clocks were only in the very latter part of her life. Her daughter, Grandma, and my mother and I all see 11:11 daily, usually twice. When I was 10 years old, my great-grandmother was in a nursing home, the kind that smells like formaldehyde and cigarettes and is an awful white and green place to live your last days. When you are in those places, your nerves and senses are on edge and death's door is around every corner you walk. It's an awful place to be as a kid visiting, but it was a place I spent many hours watching my grandmother slip into the grasp of amnesia and Alzheimer's disease. She went crazy in her last year, full dementia. However, she would still reference 11:11 all the time with a look of pure sanity, and we all sufficiently bought in that it is a time of meaning because we as well see it all the fragging time. I still do to this day. A lot of people say it is because of the obviousness of the number and that it catches your eye, but my story makes me wonder. So, and I swear this is not BS, late one October she slipped into a coma that the doctors said was the end. She had not spoken in a month after several small strokes had taken her speech. She would not come out of it, and if she did there were no brain patterns. She was brain dead, so there was little choice but to let her pass peacefully. My grandmother wrestled with this because they were inseparable. She had let her live in her and my grandfather's home for 20 years since her husband passed. On November 11th in the late 80s we get a call that she was going to die. Her life signs were virtually gone and she was alive in body only. I was so close to her and I pleaded I could come and say goodbye with my mom and grandma. They let me come. I brought my Oscar the Grouch teddy that she bought me and was still latched to me every night. We got there at about 8 p.m. that evening and sat in her room and talked. My mother and her mother would tell stories. We held her almost lifeless hands and cried. Then a miracle happened. My great-grandma opened her eyes and squeezed my grandmother's hand. Her eyes were bright and green and she had a grin of pure elation. She spoke clearly and said, it's okay, as clear as day. My grandmother let out a gasp and bawled her eyes out holding her. I cried and held her other hand with my mom. The doctor came in and started checking the life support machine, which now was making a new beeping tone. He shuffled my grandmother away a moment later and was writing on her chart. She had died. The time on the chart according to the hospital unit where life ended was November 11th at 11:11 p.m. We all were in a state of euphoric shock and I can still feel that good chill like I was there over 20 years ago. The story didn't end here, and the next part my mother chalks up to her practical joking nature. She had another daughter, my great-aunt, that always called the 11:11 total crap and total nonsense. That weekend we had her wake and that Saturday was a rainy, stormy, awful, cold autumn day. I still picture the bleakness of the leafless trees at the community funeral home and remember the cold rain. Her wake was in the morning, funeral in the afternoon. I stood next to her open casket and cried. I went to my great-aunt and did the usual chit-chat a young boy would in that situation. As we were standing there with her and my great-uncle recounting the story of that night she died, with my aunt having her typical long sneer, the power went out. I had a Timex watch, the kind with the bright blue interface. I hit the little button on the side for light and you can all guess the time, which I quickly showed to my aunt. Let's just say she was no longer in doubt. My family loves to sit around and talk about this story. I think it comforts many of the elder generation. It actually just creeps me out now, but with a hint of jubilation. And as much as this sound like a Reddit troll, there is no dice in the mirror on this one. It is all true. I have never captured it in words before and this felt great. Creepiest thing ever to happen to me was when I was at college. I was sitting alone in my room browsing the webs and I kept hearing a scratching, but it wasn't really registering in my mind. Eventually it gets annoying enough to attract my full attention and a look around to find out what it is. Finally, after hunting around, I discover that it's coming from a 2-foot-high white trash bin that has an empty liter of cola in it. I get close enough to see the empty bottle and it starts moving a little. Like something small is under it moving around. So I'm thinking, great, there's a mouse in my trash bin. Now it's important to note that I don't take my eyes off of this trash bin, as I'm assuming there is a mouse in it ready to dart at me, and I don't want a mouse to do that. I want it to be prepared for the darting. So I get close enough to almost see into the bottom of the bin and the bottle stops moving. So I gather my courage for what I assume is a tiny mouse and look into the bin, and there was not a single thing other than the empty bottle in the bin. I move the bottle around and can see through it clearly. Nothing. I was stunned, as I was just watching this bottle move around and didn't see anything jump out of this small white trash bin. So I did what any manly man would do. I went and hung out with some friends in a different dorm room until my roommate got back from work. There are some very pretty little hills outside Bangalore, India, called Nandi Hills, and it is a popular weekend getaway. Although the rusticity is its primary charm, there isn't much there other than picnic spots and an inn or two. The single-lane road that leads there is badly and sporadically lit, full of potholes and ditches, and passes through some heavily wooded areas. So a young couple back in the 80s decide to spend a weekend there. As they drive up, there is an alert on the radio about an inmate who has escaped from a mental asylum in a nearby town. Not thinking much of it, they continue along their way, except they run out of petrol on the hilly single-lane road. The man asks his wife to wait in the car while he walks a few miles to the nearest town to fetch help. She sits there in the semi-darkness, windows rolled up, and car doors locked, huddled in her seat and jumping every time a shadow moved amongst the trees. An hour passed, then 2, and no sign of her husband. Then suddenly, she heard a strange thump, but looking around saw nothing. There was another thump, and then another, till it became a rhythmic banging, and to her horror she realized it was coming from above her. Something was banging on the roof of her car. She sat absolutely still for a few minutes in a blind panic, unable to decide whether to leave the car and run, or stay inside in its relative safety. Then to her relief she heard sirens and light broke through the trees. She was surrounded by 5 police cars and the cops were all out, pointing weapons at the car. They called to her to leave her vehicle slowly, without panicking, and walk towards them. Slowly, and no point was she to turn around. She left her car, and walked slowly towards them, but the soft thumping continued behind her as she walked. Unable to contain herself, she turned around and looked. On the hood of her car was the wildly disheveled madman, holding her husband's head in his hand and hitting the roof of the car with it. Thump. 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 I was about 10 years old, and my sister was 8 at the time. I had come home from drama practice at the school kind of late, about 8 p.m. My mom wasn't home at the time, and I knew to be careful because my stepdad usually started drinking around 8 or 9. I knew something was wrong upon entering my house, because my sister wasn't watching cartoons like she usually did before she fell asleep. So I look for her up in her room, and I find her curled up in her bed. I ask her why she isn't watching TV, and she told me, because Daddy is downstairs screaming. Because my little sister couldn't really grasp the whole idea of being drunk, I asked her, is Daddy acting silly again? And she replied glumly, yeah, but he brought a friend over to play, but he didn't look so happy to play with him. Right away, a red flag appeared. I knew something wasn't right. I knew my mom wouldn't be home for a while, so we were on our own, and I needed to know what was going. I opened the door to the cellar, and sure enough, I hear these sounds. They weren't yelling or screaming, it was more of a wet gurgle, I guess you can say. I heard my stepdad talking, but he was slurring his speech, and I honestly couldn't make out what he was saying. He was pretty destroyed at this point. So I sit there on the top of the stairs, listening, slowly inching my way down, just enough so I can peek around the corner to see what he was doing. When I finally got there, what I saw, I can never forget. He had a family friend. I didn't know him, but I knew his face because he came over every once in a while, on the ground, beaten and bloodied. His shirt was ripped, and he had burn marks all over him. It was then that I heard the faint hiss of Dad's welder turn on. I saw him, bottle to his mouth and welder in his hands, slowly wobble over the man until the flaming hot tip reached his back. As he was screaming, the man looked up and saw me, and just screamed, "Run!" My dad stopped what he was doing, dropped the welder on the man's back, still burning him, and started to approach me. I stepped backward, tripped, and fell. As I was scrambling backwards, struggling to get to my feet, all I could hear is him yelling, "You wanna be like me, son?" He takes a swig of his bottle, "I'm your daddy, I'll protect you." "No, no, no, don't cry. It's okay. Don't cry. Don't you cry, you little shit." I got up, and I ran. I ran so fast. I made it out of the door and around the back of the house to yell up to my sister to use her escape ladder, which we had at all times, just in case my stepdad flipped out like this and we needed to get out, and I helped her down, and we went to the police. I will never forget that day.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.